All right. Good day to you, junior class. I am across the street pretending to be a Roman senator hosting the Roman Mega Day with the third graders. Some of you are probably absent today on other adventures, but we're going to go forward with this lecture virtually. And just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. We do have cantos 5 through 8 this weekend. Remember, that's shorter than it sounds. Still a little bit of reading. So, take a look at it, decide what kind of time you're going to have. And probably expect a quiz on Monday. I'm going to keep it pretty simple this first round through. Not trying to fool anybody or catch any of the total minutia. So look for the sins being punished, look for the ways they're being punished, and look for any major interactions between Virgil and Dante. Something that goes beyond just the mere conversation. Dante faints or something like that, So just keep your eyes open for remarkable things. Keep your pens and pencils handy as you read. It's always a good idea. It keeps you kind of engaged in the text. Okay, we've got 5 big questions for today. You can see them on the board. No need to write them right now. They will come up here piece by piece through our outline. All right, so let's start with the first question about Virgil and what the heck he's doing in limbo. So you do need your books with you today. We'll be doing a lot of page turning. We're going to start in Canto 1. Those parentheses there tell you which canto we're in, and then there's a period, and they tell you which line we're going to. So pretty similar to the way we've listed other ancient texts. So in this is page 7 of Canto 1. Virgil says, I was born sub Julio, sorry, to my Latin friends, sub Julio, though late, and lived in Rome under noble Augustus in the time of the false and lying gods. Now, at that point, it might seem like Virgil just had like a big stroke of bad luck, right? He was born at the wrong time, didn't know about the one true God. And so when we see that, we think, well, poor guy. But then later on, he's pretty clear. On page 9 of the same canto, he, starting in 113, really gives us this outline of the whole comedy. He talks about the place. The first place they're going to go is, he says, I will be your guide and lead you from here to an eternal place where you will listen to cries of despair. That's hell. A little ways down, he will say, then you will see souls who are content to stay in the fire. Now, those souls are content to stay in the fire because they hope to arrive among the blessed. That's purgatory. And then the final stage is going to the blessed. And he tells Virgil, at that point, you'll have to be passed off to another helper. That's going to be Beatrice. I'll say a little bit more about her in a moment. But just below that text, around line 149, he says, for the emperor who reigns on high wills that I, who did not obey his law, never gain admittance into his city. We realize then that Virgil's presence in there and the other pagans' presence there is not being attributed to just bad luck, being born at the wrong time in history. And there is more, even more on this place, Limbo, and the inhabitants of it a little later on. So let's take a look at line 4. This is Canto 4, line 34. So flip your pages over. It's about page 35, I guess. All right, so I'm at line 34. It says of those who are here that they did not sin. Okay, and that's interesting because it means that there's going to be people there who were just born under what might be called original sin, but who have not committed perhaps an actual sin. And we see also that there are plenty there who just simply, they may have had merit, but after Christianity, there is only one way forward. Now, these are both going to sound a little strange to Protestant ears. They're going to sound a little bit more familiar to Catholic ears, because in Catholic doctrine, baptism actually confers a grace upon the recipient. And so in receiving baptism, a child in a Christian home actually receives an advantage to have the stain of original sin removed to some degree. I won't profess to fully understand the Catholic doctrine here, but if it feels strange to you that people there are in hell just because they didn't get baptism, one way to understand that is just that baptism here is more than just a memorial, right? It's more than a symbol. It's a sacrament. It actually does something for the soul of the one who receives it. And after Christ, there's only one way to pass into eternal blessedness, and that's through baptism. Now, the pagans there, you'll notice in 37, it says that they preceded Christianity, so baptism wasn't expected or required, but they did not still give worship to God. And that should remind you of a passage from Romans where Paul says clearly that what can be clearly known about God is plain to them, meaning the unbelievers, the ones who, the pagans, because God has shown it to them. And he goes on to say that he's shown it to them in nature itself, in the way the world has been constructed, so that were a person to truly and honestly kind of reflect on this, they would be able to obey, and they would know. And so, according to Dante here, not a single one of the ones we've encountered has made it. I mean, you got the philosophers here. I'm pretty sure you got Socrates, Aristotle, the whole group is there in limbo. Now, limbo, is not the super bad place. It's described on page 39 as, consisting of a noble castle with 7 towering walls around it, enriched by a beautiful stream, and a meadow with fresh grass. And they're there talking philosophy all day. It sounds kind of like my class in some ways, but there's no hope of a bell to ever give you relief. So it's like you're just stuck there. It's never lunchtime. It's always philosophy class and never lunchtime. It's kind of a restatement of the Narnian problem. Always winter, never Christmas. Okay, so the second question is then, what is the cause of Dante the Pilgrim's reluctance to go to hell? Calling him Dante the Pilgrim, by the way, to distinguish from Dante the author, because as a literary critic, it's going to be important to do that kind of thing. You got to remember that the character in a story, even if it's in the first person, does not necessarily equate to the character or to the author himself. And at different times, that distinction is going to be more and less important, but it's always important to kind of keep in mind. So we're going to call him Dante the Pilgrim, often abbreviating it with DP, okay? Because that sounds kind of cool, right? DP. Now, let's look at his question in Canto 2. Line 10. I'm going to read this. He realizes what he's got to do. No shortcuts here. And he asks Virgil this question. Poet, I began, you are my guide. Consider whether I am strong enough before you trust me to the deeps below. You tell how Silvius's father Aeneas went while still in his body to the eternal world, but was there with all his senses intact. But that evil's constant adversary should show him such favor, considering both his high legacy and who he himself was, makes perfect sense to a man of reason, for he was chosen in the Empyrean to be the father of Mother Rome and her realm. And both Rome and her empire, the truth to tell, were founded to serve as the holy place where St. Peter's successor now has his seat. Aeneas, in the journey you affirm he made, came to know things that helped him prevail, and that led as well to the mantles of popes. Then Paul. Now, this next reference, by the way, is the Apostle Paul, but it's an apocryphal book, so you probably have never encountered the story of Paul getting to visit hell. But Paul, the chosen vessel, went there to bring confirmation from the other world of faith that leads to salvation. But why should I go there? Who permits me? I am not Aeneas. I am not Paul. Now, what is what is Dante the Pilgrim implying by that question? What would he, if you'd asked him, why are you hesitant to go down? What would he have said? I think it's that he thinks he's unworthy. He's asking the questions. They're like, maybe I shouldn't go. It's like going into a fancy ballroom dressed in gym shorts. Should I go in there? Am I dressed appropriately for this? He's basically telling Virgil, the only people that have done this before me have been like really great heroes, either heroes of the pagan world like Aeneas or heroes of the faith like Paul. And little old me, can I go down into hell? So it sounds like humility, right? It sounds like Dante the Pilgrim's actually being humble here. No, maybe I can't go. But when Virgil responds to him, we see very quickly it's not humility, right? Look at line 43, just down the page from where we were. This is Virgil. If I've understood well what you have said, replied the shade of the great-souled poet, your spirit is stricken with cowardice, which often so shrouds a man in doubt that he abandons his first noble resolve, like a beast that shies when shadows are falling. So while Dante might give off the impression that he is being humble and that he feels maybe unworthy, the truth is he's actually being cowardly. And I think this helps us to understand a little bit more of the devotional significance of the Divine Comedy. We said in an earlier lecture that the Divine Comedy gives us a narrative in a way that maybe a cathedral can't, because a cathedral just directs us upward, right? But the nice thing about the comedy is that it shows us that there's only one way to travel upward, and that is to first go down into the valley of repentance, in the valley of mortification of sin, because of your shame for it. You're fully reckoning with it, and that is not an easy thing to consider. I mean, we asked early on what can bring a person from the cliff of nearness by mere likeness, a life that looks pretty good on paper, to a true life of approach. And the answer was troubling. The answer was, well, if you want to know, go look at what happened to Guinevere and Lancelot and Arthur. It's that kind of reckoning that forces us to our knees, brings us to repentance, but then actually starts us on the path of approach to Christ. Most of us would be pretty scared if we really knew what that meant. I mean, think of the hardest thing you've ever had to give up. Think of the most shame you've ever felt, or the most furious you've ever been, and then imagine, multiplying that by the presence of God standing there as your shame and sin are exposed. So this is not an easy journey, because one thing that I'm going to say as we go all the way down is that Dante is not just looking at other sinners that he himself can be, stand in judgment of. He's in fact, I think, seeing a reflection of his own sin and seeing it embodied and seeing what it really he's seeing the final result of his own sin, and seeing the proper end to which it always has been pointing. And that's not an easy thing for anyone, right? Not an easy thing for anyone. Okay, let's take a quick tangent here. This is not one of our questions, but it is worth looking at the role of Beatrice. She is the one, of course, who had some compassion on Dante and sent Virgil to come help. Now, Dante's description of her is really important. This is Canto 2, line 76. He's speaking to her and says, "Lady of virtue." Now, notice right away, he speaks about her virtue. Virtue is the beauty of character, right? "Lady of virtue, through whom alone humankind transcends what is contained by the heaven of least circumference." And now what does that mean? What are we saying there? First of all, he's saying that Beatrice, in her beauty, this woman, is a path of transcendence for humankind, past what's called the heaven of least circumference. Perhaps talking about human reason there, or the limitations even just maybe of the celestial sphere. But this is really important because remember, Dante is himself an ex-member of the cult of Eros. He too once let Eros be his only god, and his poetry kind of went that direction along with the rest of us. But he's doing something different now. He's got a different way of thinking about life. But Beatrice has not left his imagination. Remember, he never had a consummated relationship with her, never even had any kind of relationship with her. But she represented something for him and never left his consciousness. And this should ring some bells. To see Dante the Pilgrim really being brought to heaven through Beatrice, to see Virgil call her a way of transcendence. That's exactly what Lewis said we should expect from Eros. If we use Eros the right way, if we allow Eros to do what it can do, but not more. Remember, Lewis said of Eros this: "The event of falling in love is such a nature that we are right to reject as intolerable the idea that it should be transitory. In one high bound, it has overleaped the massive wall of our selfhood, It has made appetite itself altruistic, tossed personal happiness aside as a triviality, and planted the interests of another at the center of our being. Spontaneously and without effort, we have fulfilled the law towards one person by loving our neighbors ourselves. It is an image, a foretaste of what we must become to all if love himself rules in us without a rival. It is even, well used, a preparation for that. And that's what I mean that I think Dante has done with Beatrice. He has finally allowed her to be what she should be, which is basically a conduit for him to see that beauty, that love that is truly ultimate, that can truly transform him into the kind of person who loves selflessly, not just one person, but all, because it first loves Christ, right? Okay, back to our big questions. Now, one of the hard things that we've had to face is this inscription over the gates going into hell, generally speaking. Now, there's a couple of gates we're going to pass through, actually. The first one that we're just going through now is called, if you look in your outline of hell, it's called the vestibule of hell. Later, we're going to go through another one with the famous inscription on it, "Abandon all hope, you who enter here." That one's actually the gate to the city of Dis, which is where you're going to start seeing a lot of the actual sinners and their punishments more properly. Okay, there's a few that are outside that city. The lustful, the gluttons. These are people that are basically succumbing to lower or baser parts of their soul. These are sins, you may say, of weakness, I guess. And then after that, sins get increasingly serious as we go all the way down. And now some of you are burning to ask the question, but doesn't God see all sins as the same? Is this, are there really better and worse sins? We'll get to that, so don't worry. But today I want to ask this question about the inscription. Here's what it says in Canto 3, the first couple lines. "Through me is the way to city of sorrow. Through me is the way to sorrow eternal. Through me is the way to the city of woe. Through me is the way to sorrow eternal. Through me is the way to the lost below. Justice moved my architect supernal. I was constructed by divine power, supreme wisdom." Now, up to this point, everything's fine. I don't like the idea of hell any more than anyone else, but I get it, okay? It's the wisdom of God. It's the power of God, the justice of God. Okay, all that's good. But look how it ends. Love primordial. How is hell the creation of love primordial? That seems impossible. It seems like instead of saying it's the creation of love, I'd say, in spite of God's love, there is this hell, I think of one of Lewis's books. He says there's so much mercy and yet still hell. I don't want to think of love and perdition. Perdition mean eternal judgment. I don't think of those things as being consistent. I accept them, I'll accept them both because I think Scripture speaks to both, but I don't want to join them together. Right? It wouldn't make any sense to me at all. Somewhere out there, my theology, I say, well, of course, all things are one in God, but can love really be joined to perdition, eternal punishment? And the answer is, actually, it has to be. There's no other way. And here's what I mean. If you think about what love is, it is, the free offering of oneself to someone, to another. And in the case of God, it is him offering his beauty and superiority and perfection to us for our benefit. He creates us to be in communion with him, to have union with him ultimately, but he creates it so that we do that by free choice. And there's the rub. If love is what he's going to create, then free choice is going to be the mechanism by which it occurs. And if free choice is going to be the mechanism by which it occurs, then it always remains a terrifying possibility that in some kind of self-destructive insanity, the lower nature could refuse the higher, superior nature of divine love. That love could be offered and rejected. And And so the logical reality is that in the very creation of a being like us, capable of loving union with its creator, in that act itself, God also instantaneously creates the possibility of perdition by free choice of the creature. Were he to do it any other way, were he to bind the will so that it only loved, then nothing in my mind allows me to say that creature is still free, right? And as soon as I say, could he not guarantee that everyone is saved, that everyone comes into his presence in the end? I say, well, is he going to do that freely or not? If not freely, then you and I have different views of what it means to be a human. And I'm even a Calvinist here, guys. I mean, I'm pretty strong Calvinist too, but I think that human freedom is essential to what we understand being human beings, and is essential to understanding of love. So could love create hell? Yeah. In fact, only love could create hell. There is no hell for trees, right? There's no hell for the animals. There's just an end. Perdition is saved for those who choose it, who could choose it in opposition to God. A stark reality, but I think a pretty solid argument. Let's talk real briefly about something called contrapasso. We're going to hit this a lot throughout the year, throughout this unit. Sorry, not the year, but just the unit. First of all, we get to Canto 3, line 64. These are called the neutrals, people that never committed. They sort of played the field. And Revelation 3 says God doesn't have a lot of love for these folks. They're called lukewarm, neither hot nor cold. They get spit out of the mouth. And in Canto 3, we find out that they are walking behind this banner, being stung head to foot by horseflies, wasps that are lapping at, blood's coming down their face all the way down to their feet, where their feet are being munched on, I guess, by worms, or the blood maybe is worked on by worms. So what's going on here? What's going on with the punishment? Well, contrapasso literally just means that sins are being punished by semblance or contrast to the sin itself, or in some other way there is a symbolic significance to the punishment itself. So when we see the punishments throughout hell, we should really keep our eyes open, because they're not just creative to be kind of interesting and fun. They're actually intended, I believe, to illuminate the sin in some way. So, for example, and there's not like a lot of like Dante, the author, never gave us the commentary on all this, so we don't know exactly what he intended every time. So we're having to guess. So this is the best I can do, and later I'm going to have you guessing too and trying to figure things out. But they're walking behind a banner. Okay, a banner is something you follow into war. It's a commitment. You've got a side. So they never took a side in life. They're being forced to take the side in hell. And how are they being forced? Because these hornets and wasps are biting on them and, just egging them on, so to speak. Another thing is that they're neither living nor dead, really, it says. They don't get to go to the land of the dead. They don't get to live in the land of the living. And in some ways, they're kind of like zombies, because they've got all these flies, just zooming around them all the time, like you would around a dead or decaying thing. So again, this punishment is meant to illustrate to us what was going on in the sin. This sin was the worst of all possible sins, because in some sense, it takes this human being, turns them into a zombie, and brings them into this place of almost where their will is kind of frozen and dead before it's dead, So that's my best guess at what this contrapasso means. But keep your eyes open to other sins and their punishments, and we'll try to do some contrapasso analysis later on. So let's do this last thing today. It's called the harrowing of hell. This is in Canto 4, line 49. Dante asks, did anyone ever go forth from here by his own merit or that of another to be blessed later? He says, Virgil knew what I meant and answered, I was new to this state when I witnessed a powerful being descend, crowned with the insignia of this victory. Guess who that is? Jesus. He plucked from here our first parent's shade, the shade of Abel and the shade of Noah, that of Moses, etc., etc. In other words, Virgil tells him, oh yeah, there were plenty of people down here. And then one day I'd just gotten down. So you remember Virgil and Christ, almost contemporaries. So Virgil said, just getting down here when boom, somebody shows up. They got this victor's crown on them. They come down and they snatch out of here all these. He lists a bunch of Old Testament saints. So what's he talking about? It's called the harrowing of hell. Something that you'll find kind of on the books of doctrine in both Catholic and Orthodox traditions. Talked about less in Christian traditions, but the evidence is still there. Let's start with, we're going to get to Scripture in a minute, but let's start with the Apostles' Creed. There's a line in the Apostles' Creed that some translate as descended into hell. He descended into hell. But that's actually hotly debated. The Greek word there is the word Hades, which would be a translation of the Hebrew Sheol. It's different from hell. Hell we think of as a place of, again, eternal perdition. Now you remember from the Greek and Roman literature you've read so far, that being dead for most folks is a kind of just like a neutral state. Now, Achilles, you remember in the Odyssey, doesn't like it at all, but it's not because he's being tormented and punished. It's because he'd rather be alive. Only a few people get thrust into Tartarus in Greek and Roman mythology to suffer real, like what we call hell-like punishments. For most people, hell is just a place to, it's just a place you go. You're all in the same spot. And basically, the view that Dante takes here as a medieval Christian is that that's how it was. I mean, until Christ, everybody went to the same place. And it's there's only a few folks who, like, I think it was Elijah, who get to go straight, up into God's presence. Everybody else has to die. They go down into Hades and they sit and wait. And then Christ himself dies, and when he does, he goes down to the dead. It says descended into the dead is how we translate it in my church. Descended into the dead. And then he led from there those saints who had been waiting for his coming. And he harrowed hell, if you want to say it. He took out, and harrowing, meaning to take out those the seed and separate it off. And so that's what he's doing. He's harrowing out. He's bringing in his sort of crop from the field. And you can see it in this icon here. It's him taking Adam and Eve out of their tombs there and leading them on up. And there are other little indicators in the Gospels, when all those, there's like the day that Christ dies on the cross, there's all these dead people walking around the street. Don't know what that is. It's not explained. One thought is that these are the passing of souls from under the earth into the realm of heaven to be with God until the day of the resurrection. Okay? I don't know. A little bit of speculation going on there, but we do have some scriptural evidence. Okay? Two passages that make us think that there's maybe something to this vision of a single afterlife in which both the righteous and unrighteous go prior to the coming of Christ. So Ephesians 4. Grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives and gave gifts to men. Now, Paul here is working some things out with the Ephesians about the different gifts they have and the services they're supposed to render, but he drops this interesting theological aside and says, well, in saying that Christ ascended, what does it mean but that he also descended into the lower regions, the earth? So Paul here is working with the very same sort of cosmology as Virgil was working with. You remember Virgil sends Aeneas to the coast of Italy where there's a bunch of inactive volcanoes so that he can find a cave and go down literally into the underworld. Paul has the same view, it seems. I mean, like literally goes, when you die, when Christ dies, he goes down into the earth. And it says, he who's descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. We see this also, I think, kind of in the transfiguration of Christ in the Gospels, where we see two men talking with him. These are Moses and Elijah appearing in glory and speaking of his departure. This makes sense because it's a remembrance of, Jesus is about to accomplish the Exodus And what's he going to do? He, like Moses, he's going to lead the captives into freedom, right? Those captives, those people that are stuck in Egypt, are the righteous dead who have been living along with the other dead, King David, Moses, the whole group. And their new Moses is Jesus, and he is going to go into Egypt, that is the underworld, and lead all of those people up in paradise to await the second life in the resurrection. Okay, well, so a lot of interesting things for us to chew on today. I'll be here. We'll be back together again on Monday for questions if you have anything. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I have enjoyed talking about these things with you, and can't wait to keep reading the Inferno with you. All right. Until later.